guess we're going to get the lecture started now. I want to welcome everyone to the Roswell 2012 conference, a 4-day event that continues through Sunday, July 1st. We will present 4 lectures per day, beginning at 9 a.m. and ending at 5 p.m. each day. All lectures will be right here in the Bassett Auditorium. Our lecture series features some of the world's leading Roswell researchers, as well as topics related to Area 51, secret underground bases, UFO encounters of the Wild West, how Marilyn Monroe's death is related to UFOs, and many other interesting themes. We'd certainly like to thank our sponsors for making this conference possible. We'd also like to thank Lori Roof, director of the Roswell Museum and Art Center, and her staff for allowing us the use of this beautiful facility. And if you are here just for the conference, I would highly recommend you take a look around the museum. There's a lot of neat things in here. With special thanks also to the City of Roswell, Mayor Dill Journey, and the City Council. Finally, our sincere thanks to Roswell's leading UFO gift shop and bookstore, Roswell Landing, located just a few blocks south of here at 2nd and Main. No other local gift shop has a large selection of UFO merchandise and books, as does Roswell Landing, open 7 days a week. The Roswell 2012 conference is happy to announce our next presenters, Mr. Noe Torres and Mr. E.J. Wilson. Noe is an author, publisher, UFO investigator, and member of MUFON. He holds a bachelor's degree in English and a master's degree in library science from University of Texas at Austin. Noe collaborated with E.J. Wilson on the critically acclaimed book, Ultimate Guide to the Roswell UFO Crash, released in 2010 and now in its 2nd edition. Noe has written or co-written a number of other UFO books, including Mexico's Roswell, Aliens in the Forest, The Other Roswell, Fallen Angel, and The Real Cowboys and Aliens. He is also the editor and publisher of 2 new books, Russia's Roswell Incident and Roswell Alien Autopsy. Noe has appeared on the History Channel's UFO Hunters, Coast to Coast AM, the Jeff Rense Program, and many other shows. He is also a frequent lecturer at UFO conferences throughout the U.S. and appears annually at the Roswell UFO Festival. EJ's interest in UFOs led him to move to Roswell in 2007. He served as the Roswell UFO Museum's only paid tour guide from May 2008 until March 2010. After co-authoring Ultimate Guide to the Roswell UFO Crash, EJ began offering the highly popular Roswell UFO tours. His slogan for the tours is, "Walk where they walked," and that pretty much says it all. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my good friends Noe Torres and E.J. Wilson.
Thank you, John. John LeMay will be speaking later today as well. He has a very interesting lecture, which I'm very eager to hear as well, based on his book, Roswell, USA, Towns That Celebrate Bigfoot, Aliens, and Other Strange Creatures. So you'll want to be sure to check out John's lecture today at 10:30 this morning. Right, John? Yes. All right. And then Dennis will be speaking at 1:30. What's your topic today, Dennis?
Area 51.
Area 51, of course. And the Area 51 juggernaut continues right after Dennis with our guest today, Karen Green. Karen, stand and take a bow. She's the curator of the National Atomic Testing Museum. And she came all the way from Vegas to be with us this weekend, and she'll be speaking this afternoon at, let's see, I want to make sure I got the time right, 3:15. And then she'll be speaking again tomorrow at 10:30 in the morning. So Karen, thank you for joining us. One other thing, anybody here baseball fans? No? If you know some baseball fans, John LeMay and I are going to be at the Roswell Invaders minor league baseball game on Sunday night, beginning at 7 p.m. Our conference officially ends at 5 on Sunday. And then we're going over to the historic Joe Ballman Stadium, which is located just south of Roswell, near the airfield, near the old airfield, by the way. And so we'll be giving away some of our books to fans in attendance. And it was so neat because this past week, EJ and I went, and we got to throw out the first pitch for the Roswell Invaders baseball game.
You threw the pitch. I took the pictures.
And I got it over the plate, by the way.
Yeah, you're good.
It was an EFUS pitch for those of you who are baseball fans. Those are the ones that go straight up and straight down. Okay. All right. Oh yeah, the 1:30 tour. Our tours are filling up fast. We got exposure on the front page of the Roswell newspaper today, so we've been having call after call. If any of y'all are interested in taking the historic tour of the old air base where the UFO and bodies were brought after the crash here in town, we go to 15 sites. We give you a full narration of what happened at each. And our tours today are at 1:30 and 4 p.m. We had filled up the 4 p.m. tour, so we had to open up another tour at 1:30. So that's a 2-hour tour in an air-conditioned van with a really nice professional narration done by Canadian announcer Gary Johnston.
Who you've all heard in commercials and movies and TV.
Now to the topic at hand. Okay. Back in 2006, I did a book called Mexico's Roswell. And my co-author for that book was the director of the Northern California MUFON chapter, Ruben J. Uriarte. And Ruben has been on a number of television programs, documentaries, and he's very frequently lecturing about UFOs, and he has co-written a number of books, So Ruben and I put together this book called Mexico's Roswell, which has resulted in at least 3 television documentaries that we know of, so we were very happy. So Ruben and I wanted to do another project together. Well, actually, at the time we were doing Mexico's Roswell, he brought me this accordion file with a lot of really old documents in it that had been collected over the years. MUFON had inherited it from a NICAP, which was a well-known civilian UFO investigative group in the 50s and 60s. And then when NICAP kind of folded in the mid to late 60s, MUFON inherited many of their files. So Ruben had come across this accordion file full of documents, letters, clippings, photographs, a lot of case materials about this particular case. And he presented it to me and said, Noe, I think this would be an interesting story to tell. And the folks who were involved in it, Donald and Judy Shrum, never gave their identities, never made their identities public. And I'll explain the reasons for that as we go along this morning. But the story had been told in little bits and pieces throughout the years, but the people who were involved in it were never identified. So when our book came out about a year ago, it was the first time ever that this story has been told in book form. We have some exclusive video clips that we did with the primary witness, Mr. Donald Shrum, which I'll be sharing with you. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a background on that. First of all, I'd like to start by saying that all of us here are aware that UFOs are not a recent phenomenon. They have been seen throughout the ages, throughout human history. These apparitions have been with us. We see in cave drawings, rock art, and in other media from the past depictions of what appear to be spacecraft, of what appear to be alien beings. And in fact, we were having breakfast this morning, and EJ mentioned to me that there was one of the cashiers was a Native American. Was she a member of the Hopi tribe? Navajo. but it brought to conversation the fact that some of the Hopi Indian art depicts men wearing helmets that look like space suit helmets. Is that basically it?
They have a sacred ceremony which they hardly ever share with outsiders, but that they have it can't be anything but what it looks like, a clay rendition of a space helmet that they wear as part of this ceremony. And if you look back through history, every civilization ever, whether it be Toltec, Olmec, Mayan, everyone has always had some kind of art showing these all very similar kinds of beings, very often with space helmets, even antennae. So we felt that was very interesting.
So that's just by way of introduction. Now we enter the modern era. To put this case that we're going to talk about in context, we enter the so-called modern era of UFO sightings, which is approximately 1940 to the present. Around the beginning of World War II, there were all these mysterious orbs that would tend to be seen around our aircraft, and they were often called things like Foo Fighters. And then, of course, in the mid to late 40s, we started seeing lots of sightings around the country, and culminating in the event that we all are here this weekend to commemorate, which is the 65th anniversary of the famous Roswell UFO crash in July 1947. And we're just going to listen to a moment of this worldwide ABC radio news broadcast from July 1947. Let me go back and I've got to turn the little speaker on. Excuse me just a minute. If there's no audio, the speaker shuts itself down, so there we go.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection. Late this afternoon, a bulletin from New Mexico suggested that the widely publicized mystery of the flying saucers may soon be solved. Army Air Force officers reported that one of the strange discs had been found and inspected sometime last week. Our correspondents in Los Angeles and Chicago have been in contact with Army officials endeavoring to obtain all possible late information. Joe Wilson reports to us now from Chicago. The Army made...
Okay, that gives you an idea. That gives you an idea of what was going on. It was the first time in history that a world government had admitted that it had in its possession an unidentified flying object, and we think that it is one of the most significant events in human history. So these are a few of the books that I have been involved in writing. I mentioned Mexico's Roswell, and then EJ and I co-wrote The Ultimate Guide to the Roswell UFO Crash, and then the book that I'm going to talk about today is Aliens in the Forest. The mystery of UFOs continues today. We had a UFO conference recently in Laredo. I'm going to show you this quick video clip that was done by Laredo TV station that kind of talks about how even today the interest in UFOs remains. Let me start.
But for those people who believe in other life forms in outer space, the Webb County Heritage Foundation hosted a UFO conference at TAMU, where people heard from authors and researchers. Our Lauren Kendrick has a story right now.
He says that UFOs date back to the beginning of mankind and adds that there were UFO sightings many years ago.
I mean, we found cave drawings. We have found other artifacts from thousands of years ago
Other than being seen by primitive men, Torres says there is also proof of drawings and sketches from the Middle Ages. Torres says that if other species have been traveling to observe us for years,
then obviously they would have broken a lot of the secrets of physics and space travel that we are only now starting to theorize on paper.
Torres says that people get wrapped up in their everyday lives and are so used to seeing airplanes or jets in the sky that they don't notice the unidentified flying objects.
If you pay close attention on any given night in any area of the state or country, you're likely to see a phenomenon in the sky that can't be explained.
In fact, as recent as August, there were multiple reports of a UFO sighting in Laredo. If you look closely, you can see a light shoot across the sky. Torres also spoke about the UFO that actually landed near Laredo back in 1948.
It happened in July 1948, where a UFO had been pursued by military aircraft and had gone down.
After researching the incident and talking to other UFO researchers, Torres decided to write a book about it titled Fallen Angel UFO Crash Near Laredo, Texas. When asked why people are so interested in UFOs and the possibility of aliens,
we realized deep down in our intellect that there's no way in the universe that we can be the only planet with intelligent life.
So the next time you see something in the sky, you might want to take a closer look. Lauren Kendrick, Pro 8 News.
And for those of you who want to learn more or even report a UFO sighting, you could log on to mufon.com.
Okay, so begins our story now about this interesting case which happened near Sacramento, California, and it happened in September of 1964. Here is, of course, Sacramento, and just east of Sacramento is Cisco Grove, where this incident happened. And here is kind of a map of the area. We've got, this was where the, now to set the stage, there was a group of three men, all of whom worked at the Aerojet Corporation of Sacramento. This was one of the nation's leading missile defense contractors in the late 50s, early 60s. They designed, for example, the Titan missile, the Polaris missile, and many other of the nation's missile defense systems. So these three workers from the plant, the Aerojet plant, Mr. Donald Shrum among them, were having a weekend hunting trip to the area of Cisco Grove, and Cisco Grove is actually up in this area. It's not shown on the map, but this is called the Tahoe National Forest, the Tahoe National Forest, and it is near, of course, the border with Nevada, and Lake Tahoe is way over on this side. So they camped here in the Tahoe National Forest, and then they went down hunting. At first they were together, and then they kind of separated, and eventually all three men were, hunting on their own. And by the way, this was before the start of rifle season, so they were actually hunting with bow and arrow. This is Mr. Donald Shrum. He was 26 years old at the time that this incident happened in 1964, and he was employed by the Aerojet Corporation, as I've mentioned. This is Cisco Grove, the highway between Reno and Sacramento, which back then was called Highway 40. And they came down, they parked and came down and made camp right around this area called Loch Levin Lakes. And it's a series of small lakes all around here. And then Mr. Shrum and the other men kind of went into this very rocky, forested terrain. They started early on a Friday, but by the time the incident happened, it was after sundown. So Mr. Shrum actually ended up down here in this area, and that's where his encounter took place. what happened was that this is an area which at that time was very active with wildlife. There were bears that had been sighted by other hunters. And Mr. Shrum became separated from his hunting companions, and it was starting to get dark. And they had kind of agreed with among each other that if they became separated, they would find a place to rest up for the night and then rejoin each other back at the camp. So it was getting dark, and he had not really been hunting in this area before, so he was lost and separated from his fellow hunters. So he was unable to find any shelter that was suitable and would offer him some protection from, for example, bear and other wild creatures. So he decided to rest at a tree, to climb a tree, attach himself using this military-style utility belt that he had with him, and he was going to rest as best as he could in one of these pine trees. And then he saw something very unusual, as we'll hear from the witness himself in this following clip, and let's listen to that.
And then I saw a light. It looked like a lantern going up and down a trail, but then it came over the top of the tree, and I got kind of excited then because I thought it was a helicopter from the Forest Service. And I stood between two of the fires that I built on the rocks and waved my arms and yelled and screamed, and finally that light started coming towards me. So I was really relieved then, because I thought it was a helicopter still, until it got within, maybe 60 feet or yards. I'm not sure the distance at night. But it just hovered there with no sound. So then I panicked, because I knew it was no helicopter. I thought it was something from outer space. But it looked like all I could see is about an 8-inch glow. So I thought it was just a little tiny, flying saucer. And then I kind of panicked, and I threw my bow up in the tree again, and hand walked out that limb and got up in the tree. And I had all camouflage clothing on, so I figured, well, they won't see me here, But then this light went a half circle around me over the canyon. Then I could see the shadow of the whole spacecraft, and that was just a light that was on the nose of it.
I want to ask, is the volume level okay on that, or does it need to go up a little bit? How many would like it up higher? Okay, I'm going to turn it up just a little bit. Excuse me just a second. I want to make a couple of points about what we just heard. He at first thought that it was just a very small light. And let me get back to this slide. Okay, as you can see in this drawing done by the witness, the ship itself was huge. But at first, these panels, which opened up later, were dark. And so the overall impression that Mr. Shrum got when he first saw the mothership was that all that it was this tiny, what he called a headlight at the front. When in actuality, a few minutes later, he saw these 3 panels open up, and there was a light source, obviously, there. So then he got a better feel for the overall size of the object. So,
and then I saw a light. It looked like a lantern going up and down a trail, but then it came over the top of the tree.
okay, just wanted to test the volume on that. So, okay, so now what we're going to hear from the witness next, and we of course spent hours talking to Mr. Shrum, and his story has never varied. Also, this case was investigated by J. Allen Hynek and many other UFO researchers in the 1960s, although Mr. Shrum never permitted any of the UFO researchers to use his real name. So that's why this case kind of languished and was never really received much publicity. But J. Allen Hynek considered it, and Leonard Stringfield considered this one of the strongest UFO cases of the 60s and early 70s, including and grouped it right along with the Betty and Barney Hill abduction, Travis Walton UFO encounter, and the case in Mississippi with Hickman. So I mean, this case was very remarkable. What he sees next is these three panels are going to open up. Before that, it was just kind of a dark shape, and then the three panels just slid open on the side of the hull, and then out of the middle panel, a strange object comes out. Here's another representation of what he saw. This was done, by the way, by a super talented artist named Neil Reedy. And John, where does Neil reside?
He's in Madison, Wisconsin.
In Madison, Wisconsin. And he came down for last year's Roswell Festival, but he didn't make it down this year. But Neil has done a lot of artwork for us, and he did all of the artistic representations of Mr. Shrum's encounter in our book, Aliens in the Forest. So Mr. Shrum is up in the tree. He's got camouflage clothing on and a hat. He's got his military-style belt and a canteen, and he's seeing this huge object over 100 feet in diameter approach, and the three panels slide open. Once again, the area here, they parked over here in the Cisco Grove area, then they walked down and established camp here, and then they came, Mr. Shrum came down to his location where the UFO first appeared. And this is Mr. Shrum's description of the smaller ship which came out of the middle panel of the mothership, and this is what he said.
And then I saw three panels of light, like windows or whatever, and I saw a flash come from the bottom of the center one, and you saw a dark object go down in the canyon, and then I lost track of it. And then the next thing I saw a little blinking light up on the top of originally where the first one came from.
This object that you first saw that left the center panel, what did it look like, Don?
Well, at that time, all I saw was a flash and saw a dark object go down.
The dark object, what shape was it?
Well, I couldn't really say. It went so fast. But then I saw when it landed up on the ridge that I could see like a half. I could only see part of the top, but it had a little light on it, and looked like the top of a flying saucer that I'd seen in pictures.
Like a dome? Or
yes. Yeah, like a dome. And then I kept my eyes on that.
So the second object, which actually becomes a great concern to him within a few moments of this, but when it first appeared, it just came shooting out of that middle panel, dropped down into a canyon, and then a few moments later it appeared over to the north of his position, alongside a hill, and it appeared to be a dome-shaped object with a small light on top. So here is the spaceship hovering over the canyon, the mothership. This was drawn by the witness again. Mr. Shrum is in this tree that's indicated here. He's looking across the rear, the canyon, at the spaceship that's hovering. You know, this is actually, these are the three panels in the headlight, and then there's an oval shape to it. And out of the middle panel shoots a smaller spaceship, which goes over to the north. And in between Mr. Shrum and where the spaceship finally stopped, there's a lot of brush, a lot of vegetation in here. So, okay, that's a good point. EJ reminds me that, EJ, do you want to tell him, EJ?
Maybe this is backtracking a little bit, but we wanted to fill in that when Mr. Shrum wanted to get a tree for the night, so to speak, to rest in, he also, as per their kind of normal procedure, standard procedure back then, if you were lost, to set 3 signal fires. So he found a nice flat rock, and we had a picture actually of the tree with the nice flat rock next to it.
Let me go back to that.
And we can show you where he set the signal fires, and it may be, there you go, right there. He set the fires on that rock there, and then he stepped onto the tree from the rock and was able to, that's how he got into the tree, which comes into play later, and we don't want to spoil anything for you, but it was pretty ingenious that he chose that exact spot. So you had the nice safe place to light the signal fires in case someone came looking, because he was lost. There were 3 fires, like the S in SOS. In Morse code we say did, or you would say ... and that would be the S.
Now that's the reason he thought it was a helicopter that was
Right, so since he had set the signal fires, he felt that perhaps the helicopter was looking for him. He was lost.
I'm glad you interjected that, EJ. I tend to forget some of the minor details, or some of the smaller details. I won't say minor. Okay, so the smaller ship appears and it lands, you know, a distance away from him. And because of the fact that he's dressed in camouflage and he's up in a tree, he figures he might be okay. You know, he might be able to get past this danger. Well, unfortunately, it wasn't to turn out that way, as we'll hear in this audio clip from Mr. Shrum.
And then I heard some thrashing through the brush, and probably 5-10 minutes, these 2 humanoids come out of the brush, and they kind of broke some of the brush off, and was looking at it. And then they came straight underneath the tree and looked up at me. And I knew right then I was fingered.
They found you?
Yeah, they found me.
Can you describe them for us? That was briefly what they were.
Yeah, they looked like 4 or 5 feet. Of course, I'm looking down at them, so they'd be shorter than they probably are. And they had a silvery, like a one-piece suit on, and it seemed like it had the joints, puffy joints, you know, on the shoulders and the elbows, and the legs I didn't see that clear.
The humanoids, were you able to see their faces?
No, it was just a kind of a dark shadow. I could see the 2 like eyes that were, looked like welding goggles to me. They're the same as welding goggles. And then the rest of the face was kind of a blur. I couldn't see looking down at him.
You can see was it large or small? They're
about 2 inches in diameter. It reminded me, just like I said, like a welding goggle.
By the way, the person you hear talking in the background is my co-author, Ruben Uriarte. And I also want to mention that Mr. Shrum is the most down-to-earth, traditional, conservative person you'd ever want to meet. He's not given to flights of fantasy. He doesn't drink. He's worked hard his entire life. And we were Ruben and I were both extremely convinced in his credibility. His statement was also substantiated by a sworn statement by one of the other hunters who also saw the mothership, as well as his wife and other family members who described Mr. Shrum's appearance after his ordeal, which is just now beginning. And so, he underwent a series of medical examinations as well, and he had been through a very traumatic event from which he suffered essentially the effects of post-traumatic stress syndrome for years. And this memory of the appearance of these humanoid creatures remained in his memory, etched there for the rest of his life, and even today. But for many years afterward, he would wake up with screaming fits in cold sweat, bathed in sweat in the middle of the night, with this imagery and screaming out. His wife has also stated that he would scream out, those eyes, and he was referring to the strange appearance of the eyes of these humanoids. And also the fact, Ruben and I felt that the creatures were trying to establish some kind of telepathic link with him during the incident. So they were trying to get through to him, although for whatever reason they were never able to. Well, the humanoids were only the vanguard of what was to come later in this encounter. There was another type of creature that was introduced into the scene a short while later, after the arrival of the humanoids. The humanoids had come thrashing through the brush, as we heard Mr. Shrum say, and then they stood right under the tree, they looked up at him, and that's when Mr. Shrum said he felt that he had been found. They had found him. Well, a few moments later, possibly some sort of signals were exchanged between the humanoids and the ship, one of their ships. But a few minutes later, appearing on the scene was a second type of creature, which may have been just more of the same humanoid creatures, but in a different kind of suit. Mr. Shrum is not certain about this, but the overall feel or impression that he got was that the second creature was robotic, seemed to move more mechanically, whereas the first creature had more fluid movements of its arms and legs. The second creature had somewhat stiff movements. So that's why he refers to the second creature as robotic. This was the witness's original drawing, and this is an enhancement done by nightcap investigators. So that gives you an impression, and we'll listen to Mr. Shrum talk about the second unusual creature that appeared at the scene.
And then I saw two flashing red, orange light eyes just picking its way down the ridge, just between the rocks and around them and everything, and come down and was on this big boulder, this big flat rock, and then he kind of looked up at me, and he moved his hand in this through the fires, cinders, and kind of scattered them.
And the eyes of this other creature like the robot? What did that look like to you?
It had kind of like fire. It's kind of a orangish, reddish orange, and a yellowish orange, and it kind of flickered like fire. And they're about the same diameter as, about 2 inches in diameter as the humanoids.
So, Reuben and I thought a lot about this, and we asked him many times, and he isn't able to tell us for certain whether it might not have been the same creature, just in a bulkier suit, seemed to move less fluidly. But whatever the case was, he felt that the second creature had some noticeable differences, and so he refers to them as robots. Both creatures had these burning, searing eyes that remained in Mr. Shrum's memory, as I say, for the rest of his life. And something about the eyes really, really captivated him. And, Mr. Shrum might have thought he was going to be okay at this point. There didn't seem to be anything that the creatures were, any actions the creatures were taken that could be interpreted as hostile. But then something very unusual happened. One of the creatures he describes as robotic came and stood right under the trunk of the tree, and a strange vapor started emanating from the creature's helmet or head mask or head area, as we'll hear in this clip.
And he come down up on the rock. He was about 7 feet from me, and then he touched his mouth, and kind of a steam vapor come out of his mouth, and it lit up his face so I could see some detail. And then I blacked out when that steam hit me, or I guess it was kind of took the air from me, and I'd gasp for air and then black out, and I fell over my bow. That's the only thing that kept me in the tree. And then so I figured they were out to get me then.
Okay, so the first hostile or aggressive move then was made by these creatures that he described as being robotic, and this escape of steam or vapor that went up into the air. Reuben and I and other UFO researchers have studied similar cases over the years, and we are convinced that this was some form of asphyxiant, which what an asphyxiant does essentially is it displaces all the oxygen from the surrounding air, and so it causes, you know, if you're exposed to that long enough, it could theoretically kill a living being. But in this case, just a momentary exposure caused Mr. Shrum to black out for a short period of time. So this release of vapor causing Mr. Shrum to black out actually continued for hours during the night. And in a very unusual attempt, Mr. Shrum feels it was an attempt by the creatures basically to abduct him. So Mr. Shrum was very lightly armed because, as I mentioned, they had been bow and arrow hunting, so the only weapon he had with him was his bow and his arrows. But he decided to avail himself of the only protection he had, which was to shoot arrows at the creatures. And something very unusual happened when he did so, as we'll hear in this video clip.
So I had a 60-pound bow, which is a very high velocity, and I shot, seeing as how the robot's the only thing that was causing me harm, I shot the chest area, and it has the velocity of a rifle at that distance. because I'm only about 7, 8 feet from him. And when I hit the chest, the sparks would fly like electrical, like an arc welder kind of. And then that robot backed up and almost knocked him down. He kind of fell back against a rock. And the two at the bottom took off and headed for the brush and stood out there about 30 feet from me. And then I shot 2 more arrows, and it was about the same time sequence that these 2 humanoids would, every time I'd shoot, they'd go back up into the brush, just almost out of sight from me.
Okay, okay, we can, in fact, bear in mind this was just a couple of years after a movie called The Day the Earth Stood Still. And this being that he called the robot, actually, for those of you who have seen the movie, to me resembles the Gort robot from the movie. And that even if there were an organic being in there, it still could have been perceived as a robot, the way it was encased in this metal. Also note that he was careful to avoid shooting the unprotected organic beings and focused on the one he called the robot, because that was the one that was attacking him.
He told us, Mr. Shrum told us, he did not want to shoot the humanoids because there were 2 possible consequences. Number 1, he would hurt the creatures seriously, and they hadn't taken any aggressive actions toward him, only the robotic creature had. So that was one reason. And the second reason is he feared retaliation from the humanoids. He felt that if he shot and injured them or killed one of them, then he was more likely to receive serious repercussions. Whereas the armor of the robot seemed to it seemed that he would do less damage. So he decided in a split second that he was going to attack the robotic-looking creature. And by the way, this battle between Mr. Shrum and these strange creatures went on for 12 hours, if you can imagine. He was up in the tree, they would mount an offensive, they would shoot vapor up into the tree, knock him out, they would attempt to climb the tree, he would kick them off the tree, and it went on all night long. It was a nightmare scenario. And in fact, he told us that since one of the larger branches of the tree he was in was kind of dangling over the edge of this cliff, of this steep drop, he at one point thought about just going to the edge of that branch and just jumping off, because he was under so much intense pressure. And his gut instinct was, I've had people, when Ruben and I present this case, we've had people in the audience who say, well, how did he know that they were intending to do him harm? And Mr. Shrum, the answer is Mr. Shrum just knew. He felt that if he fell into their hands, he would never see his family again. And that was the impression that was deeply ingrained into him. This is Mr. Shrum with the very bow that he used during his encounter. So, having used his 3 arrows without any effect, the only other thing Mr. Shrum could think of doing to try to buy some time and possibly survive this ordeal was that he had a lot of matches, as a good hunter usually does when they go in the wild. So he had a lot of stuff that he could burn, that was flammable on his person. So he started setting things on fire and throwing them down to the base of the tree. And this is what he has to say about that.
Then I ran out of arrows, so I only had 3 left. And I thought, well, that's when pomade hair, it was just, I mean, the cap I had on was just soaked with oil.
This is for your hair?
Yeah, from my hair, yeah, pomade. And I always carried all kinds of books and matches with me when I hunted. And so I lit that cap and it just blazed up, and I dropped it down the base of the tree. And just in that instant, they moved back about 12, 15 feet, and I glanced over at the ship that was over the canyon, kind of almost level with me, and it was almost out of sight. It was just like a star. It moved that fast.
Wow.
Just in that second. So then I got the idea that they're scared of fire. So I burned everything but my t-shirt and my jeans, and come to find out later on that it was 32 degrees out, and I was shaking and kind of overexposed for the weather. And at one time I had a bunch of change, and I threw it down, and they all kind of gathered around it. Well, after I shot or started burning stuff and throwing it down, and I even tied some of my shirt that I ripped up to a compass so I could try to hit some brush, because there wasn't nothing right underneath it. And I caught a little pile of brush on fire. I figured that would bring the cavalry. That when I run out of stuff to burn, I headed for the top of the tree. And then it was a pretty sparse tree. I could see down to the ground. And I broke off the top and threw it down. And anytime I throw down or shake the tree, these humanoids would back up.
Well, the battle then is becoming a lot more intense, and Mr. Shrum is running out of things to try. He's getting a bit discouraged. One of the interesting things that he told us, well, a couple of things. He set a lot of vegetation on fire down at the base of the tree. Well, when he and other friends and family members came back to visit the site after his ordeal, they found all the burned vegetation under the tree, and they also found his arrows that he left behind. So, you know, all the evidence indicates that, and so did the Air Force investigators, by the way, which I'll talk about later. The other interesting thing is that he did not remember that there were footprints made by the creatures during the incident, but under regressive hypnotherapy, he was able to remember that there were small footprints. He described them as like a child wearing moccasins, is how he described it under hypnosis, all around the base of the tree. Now, as we'll find out later, when the Air Force investigators got there, they erased all traces of those footprints. And they cleaned up everything, all of their evidence. The other interesting thing he told us, he threw everything that he had in his pockets down, of course. He also threw his canteen at one point. He had a military canteen. He threw the canteen down. One of the humanoids picked it up, and 2 other humanoids came around and were looking at the canteen, and they examined it thoroughly. He remembers they turned it upside down, and then after they were done looking at it, they threw it back down on the ground. He also threw all the coins that he had in his pocket, which he figures he had $1 or a couple of dollars in change, threw it all down at them. They picked all the coins up and they took the coins with them. And Mr. Shrum told us that he's talked to many people about this, and he has decided in his mind that there's very little that you can find in the way of artifacts that would contain as much information about a society as does their coinage. I mean, it has portraits of people, it has the names of locations, it has the language that they talk. So coins tell a lot about people and about human society. So he feels that that's the reason that these creatures took all the coins. They did not leave a single penny on the ground. Okay, we'll go on now. Now, another very interesting aspect is throughout this whole encounter with these beings, Mr. Shrum heard various sounds. At first he thought it was owls or bird song, but as he has had time to think about what happened to him in 1964, he has decided that it must have been some form of communication between the beings and the mothership. It was audible, but it was strange. I mean, it sounded sort of like the hooting of owls. And an interesting corollary to this is for the remainder of his life, Mr. Shrum, every time he heard owls, because they did occasionally go camping after this, he and his family, every time he heard the hooting of owls, he would become extremely tense and nervous and begin to display the symptoms of what had happened to him. So in this clip, he's going to talk about the sounds he heard that night, and also the attempts by the humanoids to climb the tree and get to him.
Did you hear any noise between them, any communication? Was there any?
You know, I heard kind of a cooing or almost like an owl, but it could have been an owl, you know, that up there, but it just kind of fit in with them.
So when you heard this owl-like sound, what did they do?
Well, they'd go on about their business, you know, what they were, but they would try to climb up the tree. They're trying to boost each other up the tree, and then when I would, that's why I know I wasn't out very long at a time, because when I'd throw something down or when I was being gassed, they'd step back from the tree, and then they'd be, when I'd come to, I'd have dry heaves and kind of gasp for air, and they'd just be trying to climb back up on the tree. So that gave me a time that I wasn't out very long.
What you see on the screen are sketches drawn by the witness himself. A little bit later, these were written in the year sketched, in the year 2000. In this particular one, he shows the entire scene with the mothership, him in the tree. You can see the bow there. Down below, you can see this robot-like creature standing beside this large rock. You've got the two humanoids here. You've got the forest, the pine forest. And here in this drawing, you've got the creature he describes as a robot, and then the creature he describes as a humanoid. And in this particular sketch, I'm struck by the similarities between the two, other than the fact that the robotic type creature may be a little bit bulkier, his suit may be a little different. You know, it is also, you know, I keep thinking it's very possible that we're talking about the same kind of being, just wearing two different types of suits. Maybe this model of suit was the one that had the gas attachment. You know, I don't know. But it's interesting. Okay, so how does this story culminate? What is the, you know, how does it come to fruition? Well, a very odd thing happened to Mr. Shrum at the end of his ordeal. He noticed that another mechanical-looking being, which again he referred to as a robot, had come and joined the first robot, and the two robots came together chest to chest, within inches of each other's chest, under the tree, at the base of the tree, and some sparks and flashing, which Mr. Shrum describes as like arc welding, started between them. And from the middle of this came a huge plume of vapor that totally engulfed the tree. And Mr. Shrum was out. He doesn't know exactly how long. When he awoke, it was morning, and the aliens were gone. And we're going to hear that here in this clip.
After I went to the top of the tree, I had a military belt, and I moved it out to the last hitch and put it around me and the tree. So in case I did get gassed, I wouldn't fall down. And then, like I said, I threw chains down and everything to try to distract them. And then finally, these two humanoids stepped back from the tree, and another robot came, and there was two, just about the same place that the two humanoids were. And they stood facing each other, and flames, just like lightning, and it real bright, and it just came between them. And then the gas was so thick coming up the tree that it would dissipate just about the time I got to me. But then that's when I'd start gasp for air, and then when I woke up from that, it was light, but the sun hadn't come up yet. And I was just hanging by my belt, my head down, my feet down, and they were gone. Well, I knew I made it. I lived through the night.
Just go back. Did you fall asleep, or this gas? Did it overwhelm you?
Yeah, that's when it completely engulfed the whole tree and got up to me, and I don't know how long I was out, but it was just you could see just a dim glow of the sun on the clouds and stuff, not clouds, but in the sky. And then when I woke up, it was light, but the sun hadn't come up yet.
So, those last few series of events disturbed Mr. Shrum for a long time, because he wasn't sure what happened during that final blackout period. He didn't know if perhaps the creatures had gotten to him, done something to him, and then put him back in the tree. He had lost time, in other words. And he didn't know the exact amount of time that he was out, so he was really worried. As it turned out, when he underwent regressive hypnotherapy years later, it became clear in his mind that the creatures never were able to reach him. And that was a great relief to him. And he also remembered other small details of the incident which he didn't recall in his conscious mind. under hypnotherapy. So the creatures then never did ever reach him. This is another excellent illustration done by Neil Reeby of that final scene where Mr. Shrum is just hanging from his belt in the tree on the morning after. Okay, we're almost out of time, but I just want to mention, this was the original sketch. It's done by Mr. Shrum with areas colored in. The other two hunters that went with him that day were Vincent Alvarez, shown here on the right with his wife, and Tim Trueblood, right here. This is Mr. Shrum in the middle. Vincent Alvarez gave a written affidavit stating that he saw the mothership when it appeared out of the, from the Earth's atmosphere. He backed up Mr. Shrum's story. Tim Trueblood spoke to the fact that when they finally did find Mr. Shrum, they were out looking for him at daybreak, and they found him lying in the grass near where he had his encounter. He testified that Mr. Shrum, he and Mr. Alvarez both testified that Mr. Shrum was in a very disheveled condition, that he had been through some terrible ordeal, that he was basically incoherent. They dragged him back to camp where he slept for 6 hours before awaking and telling them this remarkable tale. So what happened next was, as was typical in many of these UFO cases with significant eyewitnesses and evidence, the Air Force became involved very quickly, and they basically made all the evidence disappeared. They tried to convince Mr. Shrum and his wife that what he had undergone was simply a hallucination. They posed excuses such as, there were Boy Scouts camping out in the forest and you mistook them for these alien creatures. Or perhaps there were some stray Japanese who were still holding a grudge against the Americans even after World War II had ended, that were hiding out in the forest and you encountered them. Or maybe they said there was a military unit on maneuver in the forest that night, which Mr. Shrum, having connections in the military, checked into, and there were no such maneuvers. This is what Mr. Shrum said about talking to the Air Force.
Then what happened afterwards, Don? Did you talk to anyone else about your...
Well, my family, I told them. And then the only outside person at that time was a professor at one of the colleges. And my mother-in-law had gone, it was her professor when she was younger. So we told him the story, and he's the one that contacted the Air Force.
So what happened there, Don, with the Air Force?
Well, they made an appointment with two posted representatives of the Air Force, and they tried to disillusion me. They said, well, the Japanese might have had somebody out there, they still, and they said the Boy Scouts dressed up, in costume just to scare somebody. And I said, yeah, I'm sure they're going to spend all night and keep a guy in a tree, And, then they said the Army probably bivouacked up there and it was in a training camp. So my father-in-law was in the Air Force. So he called and found out there was no military in that area for any reason, because it was a pretty desolate area. And they tried to disillusion me in every way they could. And they took the Arrowhead, the main one, and they said, well, we'll get back to you and you can have this back as soon as we get through with it, which I never did. But when I went back up there during rifle season, I found the other arrow, the third one.
You found two then, and then you found the other one.
And when we went back, the area had been raked. There's an area probably 50 feet around that tree, and there was cigarette packages and cigar butts, and so I know the Air Force checked it out pretty good. And they had an easy way to find it because there's an orange circle around that tree where it caught little fires, and it was showing orange, so they had no problem finding it. And I marked on the map that they had where it was, the location.
So the Air Force, spent all this time trying to convince him that he had seen Boy Scouts dressed in masks. But then they went out there with apparently a large group of men, and they totally sanitized the area. They raked it for about 50 feet all around the tree. And so apparently there was more to it. I mean, they knew there was more to it. There was one of the arrowheads or arrow tips that he used, which had traces of the whatever substance the creatures had on their suits. And he said it was very clear from looking at the arrowhead that there were streaks of that material there. And the Air Force, the two investigators that came from Wright-Patterson to interview him, kept the arrowhead as well. And unfortunately, 2 weeks ago, we lost Mrs. Shrum. She was exposed to a lot of the solvents that were used by Mr. Shrum when he was working with Aerojet. He was they used a lot of chemicals and solvents. And the area around the Aerojet plant has been cited many times by the EPA for its high toxic concentrations. And the family feels that Mrs. Shrum's exposure to all of these chemicals, that Mr. Shrum would come home from work with all this stuff on his clothes, and Mrs. Shrum would clean and wash his clothes, possibly could have contributed to the various forms of cancer that Mrs. Shrum developed later in life. She lost her battle a couple of weeks ago. One of the last things she did was she wrote the foreword for our book, Aliens in the Forest, and so we'd like to dedicate this to Judy Shrum. Thank you very much, and we have time for just a couple of questions because I don't want to bump into the next session. Yes, sir.
How big was the object come out of the number 2 window there?
The number 2 window, we estimate, was approximately, I believe it was around 30 feet in length.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. About 30 feet long and perhaps 20 feet wide.
Wow. I have one more question. Did he ever see these humanoids go in or out of the mothership?
The mothership just hovered.
Did you see him go in and out of it?
No, he saw the smaller ship come out of the mothership, but he did not see any further entrance or departure of any objects or beings.
He was unconscious apparently when they left that morning, just before sunrise.
Okay, the mothership was 150 feet in length, which would be equivalent to about a 14-story tall building. That's how wide it was. 1 or 2 more questions? Yes, ma'am, back there.
Any DNA, since we're into DNA these days and have the technology, anything being done with him or her?
One of the interesting things, this story compares very, very closely to the Travis Walton encounter in Arizona, Snowflake, Arizona area, where Travis was abducted and held inside a ship for about 5 days and then returned to Earth. But one of the notable things about Travis Walton's case is that when they did a tree ring analysis of the trees where his encounter happened, the tree rings showed tremendous growth ever since the encounter. So in other words, the tree rings were uniform up to Travis's encounter with the UFO, and after that, they registered explosive growth. And Travis, who spoke at our UFO convention in Laredo a few months ago, he told me we were eating barbecue after one of his presentations, and he said, "I have not been sick one day in my life since the UFO encounter," which was in the early 70s. So the conjecture there is that there was some kind of life-giving or life-enhancing energy that was emanating from that craft. Reuben and I are very interested in going to where Mr. Shrum had his encounter and doing the same sort of analysis of the trees there. And Mr. Shrum has pinpointed for us the exact location. So we'll get back to you on the results of that. One last question. Anybody?
Has
Yes.
Mr. Shrum been sick?
I'm sorry?
Has Mr. Shrum been ill since the encounter?
Mr. Shrum, unfortunately, is suffering from Alzheimer's disease, and we taped this interview with him a couple of years ago, but now it's very difficult for him. He has not been able to appear, for example, on any radio or television shows, and now he's experiencing the loss of his wife recently, so we don't want to bother him with that, but yeah, very good question.
Okay, that concludes the presentation. Real quick, raise your hand if you're going on the bus tour today. Okay. Anyone at 4? Raise. Okay, and what about 1:30? Okay, wow. I'd like to see all of you for just a moment back at the table. We'll get it. It'll just take a moment. Thank you.
We're going to have a 15-minute break, and then we'll be back with John LeMay's excellent presentation on Roswell, USA, things that go bump in the night.
So people this way, please, and meet Noe also. Everything's fine. Okay, my 4 o'clock.